Hi, everyone. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. I'm Matt Freese, and I'm here with an episode for you today to review the Vikings game against the Jets. Obviously, the Vikings have a bye week upcoming this weekend, so they won't be playing. I won't be doing a preview right now. I probably am going to be putting out an episode next week. I figure I'll do a preview of the Lions game and then also try to take in some mailbag questions, try to go over, just anything you guys have of the top of your mind. So I'm going to put a call out on at Kindred Skulls on Twitter to grab those mailbag questions probably sometime this weekend, so I can prep for the show a little bit. But for this episode, it's going to be all about the Minnesota Vikings game against the Jets, and then a little bit at the end on the defense overall and kind of what's changed in a retrospective after 5 weeks of the season about what's changed from the end of last year to this year. Obviously, the defense is probably the best in the NFL, so I wanted to give them a shout out and Brian Flores to what he's doing for all of those guys on the defensive side of the ball. So first, to kick it off, we'll start with the offense from the Jets game. I think probably the headline for me is Justin Jefferson in general in this game. He had 90 yards. He had another 50 plus yards that he got due to like pass interference penalties and illegal contact penalties and that sort of things that he drew. But at the end of the day, like, I don't know if he had his best game, right? And it's kind of an interesting dichotomy with an up and down day for him, right? There were a number of plays where he wasn't able to get separation. He obviously was targeted like 14 times officially in the game, only caught 6 passes, did get the 90 yards, but 90 yards on 14 targets is absolutely not up to Justin Jefferson's standards. Like, he averages 11 yards a target or something coming into this game. You're kind of expecting, if you get 14 targets in a day, you're expecting like a 150-yard day from Justin Jefferson, right? So, not up to his standards. I really thought the Jets played him quite well. Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed and honestly Tony Adams, I thought all did a phenomenal job of covering him. I did think later in the game, and I'm going to get to Sam Darnold and the play calling and decision making in a little bit, but later in the game, Sam Darnold was forcing the ball to him in a couple of situations where it was kind of more throwaway. I do think there were maybe up to a handful of plays in the game really where, Darnold targeted Jefferson officially on the stat sheet, but really it was kind of a throwaway, including one deep ball in the end zone, right? Or Darnold might have had another open option, but chose to try to force the ball to Jefferson. There were a couple of uncharacteristic plays where he got covered. One sticks out to me in the first half, against Tony Adams one-on-one, where Adams does an absolutely phenomenal job and knocks the ball away. There were a couple other where Sauce got the better of him, right? Had tight coverage. There was a third down late in the game where the DB, I think it was Adams again, was able to drive on an out route by Jefferson and pretty much disrupt that ball. So a lot of different scenarios where Jefferson wasn't able to come through. He did have a number of big plays, right? So you had, I think a couple big hitters over the middle. The first one of the game was like on dagger. There was another one that was another dig route later in the game. In the fourth quarter, I think on that final field goal drive is when that occurred, both like 25 plus yards. He had a pretty rough drop on an out route that would have converted a third down, I believe. That was the one where it kind of bounced out. It was a little bit behind him, but it bounced up uncharacteristic, out of his hands, and Sauce kind of caught it, but Sauce was on the sideline, so it wasn't an interception, fortunately, but it could have been a lot worse. And on the first play of the game, Jefferson had a fumble, right? So uncharacteristically bad game from Justin Jefferson. A lot of credit belongs to the Jets for how they were able to play Justin Jefferson throughout this game. I said before the game that I really wasn't worried about anybody in the world going up one-on-one against Justin Jefferson, and I kind of got proven wrong a little bit there. I think Sauce and DJ Reed and all of the Jets defensive backs, because he was lined up against all of them, really did a good job of playing tight coverage and played really, really tough in this game. That's probably like the third time I've said that so far, but it bears repeating consistently that the reason the Vikings weren't able to get anything on the outside is because the Jets defense played really well and they're really good. I don't think the Vikings play another cornerback room that's anywhere close to that caliber for the rest of the season. I mean, I think this is probably the best corner room and the best coverage room in the NFL, right? The Denver Broncos are maybe making an argument, and I think you could say the Minnesota Vikings are maybe making an argument. You might be able to say the Bears, but they run their coverage a little bit differently. I don't think they're going to be playing one-on-one man coverage against us like the like the Jets were, Um, it'll be kind of interesting to see in the Chicago matchups if this is something that opponents are able to exploit. But at the end of the day, I think the Jets are kind of one of one in terms of how they're able to play Justin Jefferson. Um, so a little bit disappointing day from Jefferson. Certainly some good stuff in there. There was one drive that was basically off of the back of all penalties against Justin Jefferson. He had a couple drives where he got us down into the scoring range basically by himself, including that last field goal drive that kind of cemented, forced the Jets to need a touchdown to win the game that they weren't able to get. But we should probably go to the next, I don't want to say most valuable. Like, I think Sam Darnold's probably the most valuable player just because of the quarterback position. But the next most important player on the offense, or the next most responsible player on the offense, is Sam Darnold to me. And I thought Sam Darnold had his worst game of the season, right? I mean, people have talked about it. That's not like a shock, I think, to say that. But one of the theories I have is, he took a big hit that obviously he had to come out of the game for. Nick Mullens came in, made a great play on a single play. But, after that hit, he looked pretty skittish, like he wasn't really willing to take contact. And then also the field was awful. Right? I should probably get this out of the way. I'm going to refer to it like 10 times throughout the course of this podcast. But the field, once it started raining, was absolutely atrocious. You saw people slipping everywhere, like all over the place. The Jets offensive linemen were doing it. The Jets defensive backs were doing it. The Vikings receivers were doing it. There was like 2 or 3 Jordan Addison plays where he did it. There was a Jalen Nailor play where Darnold targeted Addison, but really he should have come back across to Nailor. But Nailor slipped on the play, so like it wouldn't have worked anyway. You see there was a fast pressure that Ed Ingram allowed that he slipped on the field. Like, just an absolutely embarrassing field. There was a play where honestly Darnold should have gotten hit really big, but 2 Jets players kind of slipped and ran into each other. Like, just an absolutely embarrassing field conditions. Like, the NFL keeps doing this in these games that are not the consistently maintained games. And some NFL fields are awful too. Like, the Packers field is absolutely atrocious once you get into the latter part of the year. I think that happens in a lot of the open air, locations in the north. Obviously, it's hard to maintain grass in winter when there's like snow on the ground and things. Or it's cold, right? And your grass out in your yard is brown and not growing, and you don't need to mow your grass from like October to, April or whatever because your grass doesn't grow, right? It's kind of hard to grow grass in those conditions. It's kind of hard to maintain an NFL field in those conditions. And the NFL fields kind of get a little bit adversely affected because of that, right? I mean, we all remember the Justin Jefferson game where Jair Alexander claims to have shut him down, but really Justin Jefferson was stupid because he didn't wear the right cleats in that game, right? Like, that's the sort of thing that happens late in the season. But for the NFL, it really seems like whenever they go to these international games, or even the Super Bowl recently, that like they've just had an embarrassing run of terrible grass with players slipping all over the field. The field in Brazil in week 1 was the same thing for, Eagles Packers in that game. Like, I don't really understand why the NFL, as such a high level product, allows the fields to be so bad. But I guess at the end of the day, it doesn't prevent them from making money off of these games, right? So it's probably not exactly high on the priority list. But regardless, going back to Sam Darnold, I thought he really struggled, particularly in the second half of this game. He took 4 sacks. Now, he got hit a bunch of times on top of taking the 4 sacks, and I don't think, every single one of the hits was his fault, or even maybe the majority of the hits or pressure that he was under is his fault. But the 4 sacks I do pretty much put on him. So the first sack was on a rollout against Will McDonald. The Vikings were on 3rd down. It was like 3rd and 1 or something. And then they were solidly in field goal range. They were like the 24, 25 yard line. Sam Darnold rolls out. Will McDonald unblocked edge rusher on a rollout. That happens like every single time you roll out. I mean, there are ways to block that, but obviously, we're so used to seeing a quarterback have to get around an unblocked edge rusher. Sam Darnold doesn't have the immediate throw to Aaron Jones. What they were really trying to do is get Aaron Jones fast to the flat and get the linebacker there a little bit a step behind in coverage and throw the ball to Aaron Jones so they could convert an easy first down. It doesn't work. I don't love the play call there. I don't love cutting off half the field on 3rd and 1, right? Like, I certainly like rollout play action. That's not something I have a problem with. That I don't love doing it on 3rd and 1 just because you're immediately cutting off half the field. You could have 5 routes that potentially win on the field, and you're really isolating it to this one route must win, or we're kind of screwed, right? And really, there's 2 or 3 routes that must win, but you can put yourself in a bad situation very quickly if your route is covered by the defense. And credit to the Jets, Will McDonald stayed home, did a good job, and got to Sam Darnold. Darnold tried to escape. Really, he should have just dirted the ball and taken the field goal, right? But he tries to escape. He ends up getting the sack. And Will Record has to make a 50-yard 4-yard field goal, which he does. Will Record, by the way, the only good special teams player on the day. Congratulations. I'm sure I'll get to that in a little bit. So that's a bad sack on the first one. The second one, I thought the Jets actually had a really nice design. So they had a defensive back who didn't start out over Jefferson, but like acted like he was moving towards Jefferson, and then Jefferson motions across the formation. So to me, that was somewhat of a man coverage indicator, or at least that player is in coverage, right? Because he's moving with the motion. But what they really did is they blitzed that corner off the edge. So he wasn't accounted for in the Vikings protection plan, which was kind of moving away from him, and Sam Darnold had quick game. Darnold didn't get the ball out quickly enough in quick game. I thought there was an option to throw a fast pass to, I believe it was Josh Oliver on that play, but really the Vikings just kind of got tricked on the play. There's not much you can do from an offensive line standpoint because you're not sliding all the way out. Like, you're having Christian Darrisaw block the edge rusher in that play. You're not having him also look for a threat off the edge, and the protection was kind of slid to the other side. So Darnold probably needs to be more aware and sniff out that rushing corner, but it was a pretty good design by the Jets. At the end of the day, I don't put the sack on the offensive line. I will kind of put it on Darnold, but it's kind of hey, the Jets really got you here, and Sam Darnold, when they get you, you really need to figure out a way to not take a sack in that scenario, right? So the third sack, I would say, was 50-50 between Darnold and the offensive line. So it's a quick game concept, and Darnold has the ability to throw. I'm sorry, it's not a quick game concept. It was like 3rd and long-ish. And Darnold really had the ability on this play to, I believe, throw with anticipation to Justin Jefferson. Sorry, it was an open Jordan Addison on a mesh route on the third sack. Darnold had the ability to throw him the ball. For whatever reason, he chose not to. And Ed Ingram and Brian O'Neill really didn't pick up the stunt very well. They got on the same level, which is what you want to do when you're picking up a stunt. But O'Neill really got shocked back by first contact of the defender. So Ingram had to kind of run with the defender who was running through him. And because if you let that guy go, as we've seen with like the Blake Cashman sack and that sort of thing, that guy turns around and hits your quarterback pretty hard too. So it led to a guy looping up the middle into Darnold's face, and he ends up taking a sack rather than delivering a ball to what was an open mesh route. And then finally, on the last play, I think he had Josh Oliver open and just didn't throw the ball. It was only a 3-man rush. The pocket got compressed a little bit, but it was kind of a short drop back. So Darnold only dropped back to like 7 yards or something on that play, where typically you're kind of like 8 or 9. It's 8 is, I would say, a good drop back. Standard depth, even for quick game. Darnold was more at 7. The pocket kind of got pushed back to like 5 yards, and that was the interior 3-by-1 defender. Darnold has a lot of space because the tackles did a good job of pushing the edges around the pocket, so they were at like 11 yards. So he has really like a 4-yard gap to kind of work through, and he just gets got by the guy who's disengaging from the offensive lineman as he's trying to escape. I really think he had the space to just deliver a ball to Oliver. But instead he tried to escape. He didn't like that for whatever reason and ends up taking a sack. So to me, most of the sacks were on Darnold. Again, there were a couple plays where he was certainly under pressure where it wasn't his fault, but I thought he really struggled to manage the pocket and manage pressure in this game. And maybe that's partly due to the weather conditions, right? I just, lambasted how the field was. Maybe didn't feel comfortable releasing the ball in all of these locations. Felt like it was going to slip out from under him, which is, a hard thing for the quarterback to deal with, and ended up not wanting to make a mistake, right, on a missed throw. But it's still a negative for the game, and it's something we got to figure out if it's going to continue. I also thought that, I described a couple of them, but Darnold was missing a couple throws in this game. There was a third down out to Addison where Addison also slipped. So it's kind of hard to tell, but I think the ball's well outside the frame anyway. There was the interception, which he kind of threw high. He just kind of forced that ball, but there were a couple ball locations that I didn't love from Darnold, right? Even the Jefferson bobble that almost turned into an interception was still behind Jefferson, right? And then there were players coming open that Darnold didn't see. So there was a third down where Darnold could have thrown the ball with anticipation. To an out route. It was a sail concept. So you got a deep corner, you have an out route by Justin Jefferson, and then you have something in the flat, right? And it was third and long. The out route was absolutely there to Jefferson with anticipation. You can see the defensive back's back is turned. Jefferson's 100% going to win on the route, and he 100% does win on the route. It's just Darnold didn't really feel comfortable stepping up into the throw. So, for whatever reason, and there was a little bit of pressure in his face, so the pressure maybe was getting to him and he wasn't fully comfortable. He pulls the ball down, scrambles out to the left, has nothing there, throws the ball away into the stands. There was another play where, again, somewhat pressure in his face. Actually, the Jets did get two free rushes that kind of collided, but I felt like Darnold had the space, and this is what you have to do as an NFL quarterback, to step in and deliver the throw. This is something that Kirk Cousins was absolutely phenomenal about, is standing in, stepping into the throw, and delivering it despite the big hit you're about to take. Darnold had the opportunity to do that on this play, which was Jordan Addison on a deep over. And really, Addison was wide open and could have gone for 6 if he was able to get enough air under the ball, but it really should have been a completion. It landed like 10 yards short of Addison because Darnold was trying to throw off of his back foot and couldn't get it enough on the ball, right? So bunch of missed throws, open receivers or opportunities or windows that I thought Darnold was missing by double clutching. And I talked a little bit about him double clutching against the Packers last week. I think it showed up again this week. So those are certainly all concerns for Sam Darnold moving forward. I think with a better field surface, better conditions, and a little bit of maybe recovery from what seemed like a chest or rib injury that he might have received, to me, I think he can certainly get better throughout the season and play up to his, a little bit of his early season level of play, but I don't think we're going to suddenly see, best quarterback in the NFL, Sam Darnold. I think we've kind of established a standard of where he's at, which is certainly a startable NFL quarterback, but not somebody who's going to be, one of the best players in the NFL, right? And suddenly competing for, getting up in the conversation with like a Josh Allen, or even getting up in the conversation with like where Dak Prescott and Jalen Hurts and Jordan Love kind of are at right now, right? So we have certainly found more than $10 million worth of value in Sam Darnold, I think, on this season, but I don't think it's going to peak at that $50 million a year value, right? Maybe somebody will decide that that's what they want to do after the season, but I don't think that's going to be the case for the Minnesota Vikings. So, moving on from Sam Darnold, one thing I did want to get to real quick, which was super fun, was the singular Nick Mullens play that we got in the game. I thought the design was pretty cool, so I wanted to talk about that, but I also thought the decision from Nick Mullens was pretty cool, and embodies who he is as a player, right? I absolutely love Mullens as a backup on this team just because of his aggressiveness. So the Vikings are running mesh. I thought they had a pretty interesting way to get to mesh. So mesh, if you don't know, is two receivers running across the formation. They kind of almost try to run into each other. That's kind of the mesh aspect of it. And the intent of that is to get the defensive backs to run into each other if it's man coverage, right? And you get one of them running away, or get the linebackers having to try to communicate back and forth. And hopefully you find space and sit down in zone. One of the things with mesh that is typically run is out of the backfield. The running back runs a wheel route, or it's called mesh rail, typically is how I've seen the play named, right? Where the running back's running a wheel route. You also have what's called an over the ball route, usually a curl run by a player that's behind the two mesh players running across, runs a curl route. He sits in the middle of the field. So if you only have two linebackers, right, you have three players in the middle of the field, and all of a sudden one of them can't be covered, right? Even if you have three linebackers, it's not the easiest thing in the world to cover because of the communication. And when I say linebackers, I mean like a linebacker level players. Obviously, a lot of times there's going to be like a nickel in the modern NFL. But The Vikings get man coverage on this play. Nick Mullens diagnoses it. He also very quickly I should go back. The Vikings ran this out of empty. So instead of the rail route, it's just a vertical route that's an alert for Aaron Jones. And the alert is basically like, if you like your matchup, go and throw the ball to that player, right? That's what an alert is, depending on the coverage, depending on the matchup, right? So there's a linebacker all the way out over Aaron Jones, a linebacker in man coverage against Aaron Jones. Nick Mullens comes in and after injury, part of the message has got to be don't screw it up, right? From the head coach, just like don't do anything catastrophic. Well, Nick Mullens does something awesome. Throws a great, well, not a great ball, but throws a vertical route to Aaron Jones. The linebacker played it like it was going to be a quick route. It was like 3rd and 1 or something. It was 3rd and short. So the linebacker's expecting something quick. He sits on that. Aaron Jones runs right by him. Nick Mullens throws a vertical ball. It's a big explosive play, right? Super fun. He probably also had something on the mesh, but you love to see him take the alert. It was man coverage, so usually the runaway routes are good on the mesh, right? Ball was a little bit underthrown. If it leads Aaron Jones, it frankly might be a touchdown, but at the end of the day, we'll absolutely take the result for your backup having to come in for a play and convert a 3rd down, right? Like, what an awesome result from that play. Love Nick Mullens. I think he is absolutely so enjoyable to see on the field, right? I don't want him to be the starting quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings. Like, I don't think that ends well. We saw that last season, but as a backup, I'm all for it. I want to keep him forever. If we move on to a couple other offensive things, first of all, the run game couldn't do anything after Aaron Jones was hurt. I think the field conditions played a massive, massive role in that. Like, I don't think Ty Chandler is nearly as good as Aaron Jones. Gone over that a lot in the podcast. I thought early on the Vikings were blocking things extremely well. You had a lot of movement on duo up the middle again in this game, kind of for the first half. There was a play, honestly, where a duo block screwed up. Bradbury kind of got backdoored on what he was trying to do in a double team because the defensive tackle, between him and Ingram did not do what he expected at all. And Aaron Jones made it work. He shed that tackle from that defensive tackle, right? Aaron Jones is a really good player, and I think not having Aaron Jones in the game certainly hurt the Vikings from a running perspective. But I also think it is extremely, extremely difficult to block given the conditions. You saw, Darisaw and Brandell slipping over each other. You saw Ed Ingram slip multiple times. You saw just a lot of rough play from the Vikings offensive line in the second half. And I think it was more they couldn't get their footing than it was they aren't all that good or cohesive as run blockers, because they've been really good and really cohesive as run blockers throughout the season so far. So kind of a combination of things. And the Jets were playing really aggressively, and credit to them because they got a couple of really nice plays from their linebackers. In terms of their ability to get through blocks and get in the backfield. But at the end of the day, like, I'm not necessarily concerned about the run game long term. Like with some of Sam Darnold's inaccuracies, right? Not all of them. I do think there is a field condition thing that you have to account for. I think that affected everybody on the field. But I also think that, if Aaron Jones is out for a significant period of time, which it doesn't sound like he's going to be, but it does sound like a week-to-week injury. So, right, he might miss a week or two. The Vikings are certainly going to suffer from a run perspective if Aaron Jones isn't able to go consistently because he's a really good football player, and I don't think Ty Chandler is up to those standards. But the final thing I wanted to talk about on offense, and this is probably the biggest thing that's been a discussion point all week, especially with how the games have gone the past 2 weeks, right? The Vikings get up to a big lead, 28-0 against the Packers, almost give it up, end up winning 31-29. The Packers, I talked about it in last week's episode. They were never really close in that game. That one was not as much of a concern to me. This game against the Jets, obviously the Jets had the ball with multiple opportunities to tie the game or take the lead after the Vikings went up 17-0, right? And they ended up winning the game 23-17. but it doesn't feel nearly as good to me as the Packers win last week did. And because of that, the offensive failures in the second half have come under the microscope a little bit. And it's certainly fair, right? Like, you go up 17-0. Honestly, your offense couldn't do much all game. You only scored 10 points on offense. And I believe one of those at least was on a field goal on a short field, right? And I should say, you scored 16 points on offense. One of them was a field goal on a short field, and the lone offensive touchdown drive was aided by a ton of defensive penalties. Now, valid defensive penalties, right? Like, the Vikings should have had big plays or opportunities for big plays on the pass interference penalties that, were called on players against Justin Jefferson, going against Justin Jefferson. But at the end of the day, it kind of feels, a little bit Mickey Mouse in terms of you had a scoring drive that had a ton of defensive penalties on it, right? So, play callings come under scrutiny for Kevin O'Connell in the second half, right? And it's a lot of it has to do with the number of deep shots that Sam Darnold was taking. I talked about how I thought in a couple instances Darnold was a little bit too aggressive, but I also went through, watched the plays, and kind of went back over the play calling in the second half to try to figure out like what the root cause, and if there actually is a play calling issue, or if I don't really have a problem with it. And let's go into that right now. So first of all, I think we have to note that the Vikings attempted 7 runs and they ran 2 screens in the second half, right? Neither of the screens were successful. And I talked last week about how good of a job the Vikings screen game did against the Packers, right? So like, the Jets did a really good job covering the Vikings screens on offense in this game, but I don't think saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't throw screens in the same style that we were throwing against the Packers is the correct answer for that problem, right? I think you give credit to the Jets for playing really well, just like you give credit to them for playing Justin Jefferson really well, and you kind of move on there and you continue to run those plays that have been very effective to you up to this point, right? The Vikings ran the ball 7 times. Between those 9 plays, right, 2 screens, 7 runs, they had 0 successful plays. I think the most they got on a single one was like 3 yards, right? The screens, one was an incompletion that Darnold had to dirt because the tight end got held up, and the other was a 1-yard gain for Chandler. All the runs were like 0, 1, 2, 3-yard gains, and all of them came with 10 yards to go, right? So you're really not getting anywhere close to success on any of those plays. That's 9 out of, by the way, there were 27 play calls. And I should say, one of the runs, I believe, was offensive holding. So maybe there were only 8 runs on the official scoreboard. It was, Ed Ingram, illegal block in the back. It was the illegal block in the back play. It wasn't holding. But, so, at the end of the day, like, not a great showing from the run game, and I kind of talked about with the field conditions why I think that is. So, you're only running on a third of the plays, right? That's maybe not as many runs as you want to call, but when absolutely none of them are effective, I can't really get on Kevin O'Connell too much for not calling runs because it's not working at all. You're in a bunch of 3rd and longs, right? So the Vikings ended up in 6 3rd and longs throughout the quarter. I don't think that they converted a single one of those plays, right? And if you look at it, I split it into both quick game throws, which are, Darnold hits the top of his drop, is supposed to release something somewhat quick, and deeper throws. So the quick game throws, one failed completely because Ed Ingram slipped on the play. The defensive tackle went right by him, was pressuring Sam Darnold immediately. Darnold had to scramble and throw the ball away. That's bad field conditions causing a problem. Maybe you could say it's an Ed Ingram issue, but it was very obvious that he tried to put his back foot in the ground and it slid. I think that's primarily a field issue. One was one I talked about earlier where Sam Darnold just missed a throw to an open Jordan Addison. The final one was where Justin Jefferson didn't win on an option route where he was short of the sticks. On the 3 deep throws, there was one check down by Darnold because nothing was open deep. It ends up short of the sticks. Kind of is what it is, right? It was like 3rd and forever, 3rd and 14, 3rd and 10 plus. at the end of the day, you're probably going to end up checking down and not getting the first down in that situation. The next one was the one I talked about where Darnold missed a Justin Jefferson that was breaking open. So I really think that should have converted. And one was the forced interception on the throw to Jordan Addison, right? That's a ball where I think Darnold should have did what he did in the first one, check down, punt, lived another day, but he tried to force the ball in there, couldn't layer it in over a defender and down to Addison. It sails over to the defender over top. So then when you break down other passing plays, right? Third and long, you have to pass. You can't run play action. There's not really much you can do other than try to run routes past the sticks and try to convert, right? So if you look at the other situations where, again, it's pretty much all long distance situations. They ran 12 total plays, and 5 were quick game and 6 were deep plays, right? I've seen a lot of comments that people want the Vikings to run more quick game in those situations. They ran 5 quick game plays in those situations. The best play was when Sam Darnold threw deep. It was just another alert, 1-on-1 to Jefferson. It was like stick or something at the bottom of the screen. A quick game-esque concept. Sam Darnold takes a 1-on-1. He gets a 24-yard defensive pass interference call, right? Going to Justin Jefferson against DJ Reed. So, we talked about if you're talking about wanting to run more quick game, the most successful quick game play was a deep throw. One of the quick game plays, ironically, was a sack. That's the one I was talking about where Darnold had Oliver open, but he held it and there were only 3 rushers. 2 of the quick game throws ended up being short completions, like 5 yards. So they did move the ball a little bit. And one was the drop by Justin Jefferson on that out route on the sideline. So it would have converted a first down, but it ended up being a drop. There was one play action throw where it was a play action rollout, right? So you're attacking those 3 levels. Same thing I talked about with the third down earlier, or similar concept, right? That was complete for 5 yards to Addison underneath. That was on first down. So that was a pretty successful play. And then there were 6 deep throws, 5 of which were on play action. 3 of those deep throws were 20-plus yard gains, right? So we're talking about not loving how far Darnold's throwing down the field, but by far the best success rate in terms of plays were the deep throws that Darnold was throwing down the field. It was 2 big 25-yard in to Justin Jefferson. I think there was 1 to Jordan Addison, and then there was a 20-yard gain to Johnny Munt on the final play. On 2 of the plays, there were misses with an open player. So one was a throw deep to Jefferson in the end zone, and this is the one that sticks in my mind the most, with Johnny Munt wide open underneath Jefferson. So Darnold on the read, I don't think he was wrong to take Jefferson necessarily. He identified a one-on-one matchup with Justin Jefferson, threw the ball deep, and wanted Jefferson to win. If he had held the ball for literally half a second longer, Johnny Munt breaks open immediately underneath where Jefferson's running the deep route, right? So if he goes off of Jefferson and moves on to Munt in the read, he has a huge play, like a 20, 30-yard play on that play action. He chooses not to do that, and it ends up being an incomplete deep ball, right? And that's, I think, where we see a lot of the complaints about the deep ball. The other one was the throw where it was short to Jordan Addison, right? Where I thought he could have stepped into the ball more and delivered the ball a little bit deeper. And then the final play was one where it was a really weird kind of play. It was play action. They only ran 2 vertical routes. They didn't really have a check down. They were trying to do kind of max protect, and the protection worked, but neither Addison nor Jefferson won against man coverage. So this is another one where he targeted Jefferson like in the end zone from like the 40-yard line. And it should be noted that the Vikings had just gotten the ball. So a lot of times you do like to take shot plays in that scenario, right? And kind of hit them right away. But, that play didn't function all that great. So if we break it down, right, there's like 7 longer developing passes. Most of the plays were third and long, where the Vikings really need to throw the ball past the sticks or it's not really worth it anyway. 9 of the plays were runs, and then there were 5 quick game plays. So if you want to up the dial of quick game compared to the deep passing in those scenarios, I don't really agree with you, because I thought the deep passing could have been very, very successful, right? They hit on 3 of the 6 plays, and 2 of the other plays they really honestly should have had big hits on. So for me, I don't have a problem with the play calling at all. I think Kevin O'Connell does a phenomenal job doing things to get guys open in third down situations, deep in general. And yeah, it was kind of tough with the field conditions, but they weren't successful doing anything else anyway, right? It's it's one thing to say, hey, the field conditions made it hard to throw the ball deep. The field conditions also made it hard to run the ball. The field conditions made it hard for players to cut quickly on things like quick game. So really overall, the field conditions just made everything really, really hard. So you're going to try to do, I want the team to go back and try to do the thing they're good at. Their bread and butter for the Vikings and the bread and butter for what Kevin O'Connell does as an offensive designer is the passing game. So I'm fine with him doing that. If we flip, so that's kind of rant over, right? On the offensive side of the ball, on the play calling, I don't have a problem with what we're doing in the second half. I don't think that the failures that we're having are sustainable, honestly, because I think there's a lot of good things going on. And I should say with the caveat, if Sam Darnold picks back up to his level of play that we saw through like the first 3 weeks, as opposed to the last 2 weeks, particularly in the second half, I don't think that the misses that we've had are sustainable, right? So I think that this team is going to start looking a lot better in second halves if they continue to be aggressive. And that's just kind of how I feel about it. So if we flip over to the defensive side of the ball, first of all, I thought it was another phenomenal defensive performance. One of the things with the Vikings right now is you can't really look at the volume stats, especially in the passing game, because teams are throwing the heck out of the ball against them. Both Rodgers and Love had over 50 passing attempts. That's a lot of passing attempts for an individual game. Even if you get to 40 passing attempts, you're throwing the ball a lot, and you're probably down most of the game, which obviously our opponents are. The Vikings have had, I believe, 230 passing attempts against them. If you throw in sacks and all the penalties and scrambles and that sort of thing, opponents have had 268 dropbacks. The Bucks are the only ones. So in that 230 number, the Bucks are the only ones above 200. I think they have like 203. The next is like 285. So the Vikings have 45 more passing attempts against them than the third place team in the NFL. And like, if you take the span all the way down, it's something ridiculous. Like, you can go from the third team to like the 25th team with that 45 gap in passing attempts in terms of how many teams have faced. Right. So teams are throwing the ball a ton against the Vikings. You can't really use volume stats to account for it. I thought the Vikings had a great day against the Jets. And in particular, I was a little bit surprised, given Aaron Rodgers' experience in the NFL, that our cover zero looks were so very effective against him, right? So we go to the Andrew Van Ginkel pick, which is a great play. It's been broken down probably 500 different ways, right? But at the end of the day, what it was were the Vikings were running their hawk blitz out of their cover zero look. So they've got a picket fence at the sticks, right? With 4 defensive backs, probably. I honestly can't remember off the top of my head, but one defensive back per receiver split out. And then they've got everybody else up on the line of scrimmage, right? So you've got one more player who's threatening to pass rush than you do the number of blockers on the offense. That means you must throw hot as the quarterback, right? So the Vikings as a defense understand this. They know the quarterback's going to be looking to throw fast. And Van Ginkel in particular is the one who drops back. So if the offensive line moves towards Van Ginkel, if the center turns towards Van Ginkel to drop him, he's instructed to do what's a tag pressure, which is take a step forward, sometimes touch the offensive lineman, sometimes not. It kind of depends on the pacing of the play, and then drop back into coverage. On that play, Van Ginkel watches Rodgers' eyes, drops back to exactly where Rodgers is throwing the football. The Jets are running a play I actually like a lot against the Vikings cover zero blitz, where they had Tyler Conklin kind of as a lead blocker. Like, he runs straight, kind of looks like he's going to get the ball, but really his job is to block the defensive back. And then there's a slant quickly underneath it. And I think it was Garrett Wilson on the slant. So you get your best player with the ball in their hands, maybe outside of Breece Hall, but like the best player in the ball in their hands from the receiving room, on the quick slant. The problem is the play doesn't account for Van Ginkel dropping into space. Rodgers throws it right to Van Ginkel. It's great effort blocking by Harrison Smith on the pick six. Just a great overall team effort to get that ball back into the end zone for a touchdown. But really not a mistake that Aaron Rodgers should be making, frankly. Like, if you've watched the Vikings, and I could have told you this is exactly what was going to happen when the Vikings show this pressure, somebody's going to drop into that underneath window. So maybe Rodgers thought he could throw in and he couldn't, just because Van Ginkel's that good of a player and good at tracking the ball and catching the ball. But at the end of the day, like, I can't believe that Aaron Rodgers threw that football. Then later in the game, Harrison Smith came unblocked off the edge off of a similar look because we're sending the house. Rodgers had to know somebody was unblocked. He had that many threats on the line of scrimmage. He doesn't do anything about it at all, ends up getting sacked, and takes a hard hit to the back, right? Like, and it was another situation where Vikings players dropped back just like Van Ginkel did, but you got picked on that play before, dude. Like, I don't understand how you aren't aware that that's exactly what's going to happen on that play. They're going to drop back into the space where you want to throw the football. And now when you clutch the football because you did that, Harrison Smith's going to come free off the edge and hit you hard and get a sack. So it really kind of shocked me how poor the responses were for the Jets. Now, I thought they had a couple opportunities that were decent, to be honest. The first third down of the game, I think they ran a screen to Garrett Wilson that ended up short. Stephon Diggs had converted on a very similar play a couple weeks ago against the Vikings' very same blitz. And at the very end of the game, there was a shot where, Garrett Wilson ran a double move and against the cover zero, Aaron Rodgers got the ball off. Garrett Wilson got behind Stephon Gilmore, was wide open, but the ball was just a little bit too far. And I thought the Jets did a pretty good job protecting that. I don't know. The thing is, I don't know if the double move was planned because Wilson really ran a curl. Like, he definitely ran a curl. So I don't know if this is something that was improvised as part of the play or it was part of the play design and planned, and Wilson didn't get out of the curl route to the vertical route. Like, he kind of oversold the curl route. I'm not sure, but for whatever reason, luckily they weren't on the same page, right? Because it easily could have been a touchdown. But at the end of the day, on that play, because they weren't able to hit that, they went 3 of 6 for 17 yards with the sack, which is -8 yards, and the pick 6 against the Vikings cover zero looks. I saw Justin Herbert go like 20 of 25 against those looks. That's an exaggeration. I just kind of made up a number there, but like Justin Herbert's day where he was phenomenal against the Vikings for the Chargers last year was all against that blitz, right? So like high level processing QBs have had the ability to beat it in the past. But Rodgers couldn't do it. And it kind of shocked me that he wasn't able to beat it, but I'm very happy that he wasn't. Other notes from the defense in this game, right? I thought Jonathan Grenard had another really good game. He's clearly the best pass rusher on the Vikings. Olu Fashanu, the tackle for the Jets, I thought had a really rough game. Like, almost everybody was beating him. You saw reps from Grenard. I'm sure there was one from Van Ginkel in there. I remember one from Pat Jones as well, where they were really able to beat up on Fashanu and pressure Rodgers quite often. So great to see from the defensive line. On the play where Rodgers got hurt, or at least was screaming in pain and went out for the play, right? You had a really nice stunt from Grenard and Ward that got both players free. The center kind of overcommitted, wasn't able to get to Ward, wasn't able to get to Grenard on the loop. And then Ward got past the guard as well. So, really good pass rush. I thought, the Jets were able to move the ball a little bit. They got a couple quick snaps. They got a couple quick throws. But I thought the key for the Jets moving the ball was how Aaron Rodgers was playing, right? So I criticized him for the cover zero, but he still has a really good feel for where to place the ball against coverages. And I thought the Vikings had tight coverage in a number of areas. There was a throw in the end zone to Lazard that I think Lazard dropped. It was the drop by Lazard that comes to mind as a play where, hey, look, there's really good coverage by the Vikings on this. Aaron Rodgers puts it in the perfect spot for Lazard, and Lazard can't catch the ball. I thought that happened a few times, right? So if you get kind of mind meld teams where they're on the same page, better than the Jets were, right? Because Rodgers missed a bunch of throws to Garrett Wilson in this game. There's a lot of rough stuff from the Packers receivers where Lazard probably had like 3 or 4 drops. Mike Williams might have had a drop as well. You can attack this Vikings defense, but you really have to hit narrow margin type plays to be able to do so effectively. And I don't think that's going to be a repeatable skill for any offense, especially considering the offenses we've gone up against already. So at the end of the day, I thought, overall a great performance from the defense. I don't think there are really any major weaknesses in the defense, right? The way to beat the defense is just make better plays than the players on the Vikings do. And I haven't seen a team, and we've gone up against some of the best offenses in the NFL, that's been able to do that on a consistent enough basis for it to matter over the course of the game, even in this game where the offense played abysmally for the whole second half, right? So I talked about the Andrew Van Ginkel interception in length. I talked about kind of one of the sacks there. I did want to go over, a couple more. The other two interceptions, the Cam Bynum interception, to me, I think it was Cam Bynum. Sorry, the second interception that Rodgers threw, he just sailed the ball over the receiver's head. To me, there was good underneath coverage. I believe it was a cover 3 play. It might have been Tampa 2, but you had a linebacker, a defensive back underneath. Rodgers sails the ball over the head of the receiver. He's kind of forcing it. I think he's a little bit frustrated at that point. Goes right to the safety over top. Right, pretty straightforward. Very similar to the throw that Darnold made later in the game. But I was really impressed by Stephon Gilmore on the interception he had going one-on-one against Mike Williams. So in this scenario, Mike Williams is running a one-on-one vertical route. I think Aaron Rodgers wants him to go back shoulder. And Williams doesn't see that at all. He's not on the same page. He doesn't do that. But Stephon Gilmore has a offensive player he's going up against who is not looking up at the ball, but he individually has the wherewithal to realize he's running a vertical route. That's the only thing he's running. He peeks into the backfield at Rodgers to where the ball is. That's really hard to do as a corner when you're trying to run backwards with a vertical route. But Stephon Gilmore, given his experience, given his level of play, has the ability to look back and see that, find where the ball is in the air, and make a really, really tough catch, kind of going into the round, going underneath, showing great ball skills to get the interception. I thought it was just a phenomenal play from a player who's still really good. He may not have the peak athleticism that he did, but I thought it was awesome to see that from Stephon Gilmore. And now every single player in the Vikings secondary has an interception, which is kind of crazy, right? Griffin, Murphy, Metellus, Bynum, Harrison Smith, and Stephon Gilmore all have picks on the year. One final thing from the game, and then I kind of want to get into what I saw from the defense in general over the first 5 weeks, is just, two final things. Run defense, I thought, was spectacular. The Jets could get absolutely nothing going on the ground. I think they had one 10-yard run by Breece Hall, and that's really the only positive run they had all game. Dallas Turner had great burst on it was great play across the board from the Vikings run defense, and that the same issues with blocking in the second half that the Vikings had in the run game, I think plagued the Jets a little bit. But Dallas Turner on the 4th down stop, made an absolutely fantastic play. So it's a split zone run by the Jets, and there's a tight end trying to come across the formation to block Dallas Turner. Turner runs right by the tight end and gets to the running back. Like, that's the level of burst and speed that you drafted Dallas Turner in the first round, because he has. So fantastic play there. The Jets tried to split block and move tight ends around all game, and it didn't work like a single time. I don't know if the Vikings edges are just like that good that they were able to get around that, or the Jets are just kind of, the tight ends are that bad at run blocking that it was just completely ineffective. But one of the two, and I'll try to give the credit to the Vikings there, right? The next guy I wanted to shout out was Ivan Pace, who had 6 tackles, including the sack and the tackle for loss, in 26 plays in this game. He was an absolute nightmare coming forward. I still don't think he's like a complete player as someone who you can trust in coverage every single snap, which is probably why he only played 26 games in addition to him coming off of injury. But when he comes forward, there was a play where I believe it was 2 tight ends that he went through, but he went around the block from the first tight end and ducked underneath the block from the second tight end to make a play on the running back in the backfield. Like, he phased through 2 players, and his quickness and ability to avoid blocks and get off blocks and get around blocks and still make plays on the ball carrier is absolutely absurd. Like, I can't think of anything like it. Like, to me, he's the player like people hope or like people pretended peak Devin White was. That's who Ivan Pace is to me. Like, he's an absolute menace moving forward, going into the backfield. So I love him. I love to see it when he's on the field. I think he's awesome. But with that being said, on the Jets game, I kind of want to wrap that up, put a bow on it. We'll go into the bye week. We'll see where we're doing in terms of an episode next week. But I want to get to the Vikings defense overall. Obviously, the Vikings have the number one defense by EPA per play allowed. They have the number one defense by DVOA allowed. And I think it's a little bit different this year than it was last year because of the high level stretch last year, right? Where they beat the Bears, they beat like the Broncos, the Raiders, or they didn't beat the Broncos. But they played the Raiders, the Bears, the, Saints, the Falcons, right? They're going up against guys like Justin Fields, Taylor Heineke, Jameis Winston and Derek Carr, Russell Wilson, Aiden O'Connell, right? Not great quarterbacks in the year 2023. For like a 6-game stretch where they're one of the best defenses in the NFL. I looked it up on DVOA. They were second in DVOA on that stretch of games last year, right? They're first in DVOA through the first 5 games this year against CJ Stroud, Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love, Brock Purdy, and, Daniel Jones in there, right? We played the Giants week 1. But it's just an absolutely different class of quarterbacks that the Vikings are beating up on this year. And they're really doing it on a consistent basis. Like Packers fans tried to claim that Jordan Love had a great game. Jordan Love didn't have a great game. He threw for a lot of yards, but that's because he threw the ball like 50 plus times during the course of that game. Overall, you look at every metric other than like gross passing yards allowed, because as I talked about earlier, they've had like the most passes by far, like a full extra games more worth of passes than like any other team thrown against them because they've been in the lead so much. I think this defense has been phenomenal, and I wrote an article about it on Zone Coverage. I highly recommend you check it out because it has a bunch of videos, a lot of supplementary information for what the Vikings are doing. But I think if you want to look top down for what the Vikings are doing, it's the same basic principle as last year, right? You're being very aggressive in terms of what you're showing on the line of scrimmage. You are putting a lot of bodies on the line of scrimmage. You're blitzing a lot. You're blitzing in a lot of different ways. You're running a ton of stunts up front when you're blitzing. But you're also backing off into coverage, and kind of playing max coverage stuff, as much as possible. So everything has to do with the disguise. You can get to any coverage from any pre-snap look, I think is the principle of the Brian Flores defense. And that's what keeps offenses on their toes. The thing is, the difference between this year and last year is how many different coverages they're able to get to. If you look at last year, they were primarily cover 2 and cover 3 team, and cover 2, by cover 2, I mean mostly Tampa 2. And I don't have the exact numbers on what was what, but last year they ran cover 2, primarily Tampa 2, 28% of the time. They ran cover 3, 36% of the time. And then they ran cover 0 as the third most common at 11% of the time. They only ran 11% quarters, 2%, cover 6, which is quarter, half, or half, quarter, and 8% cover 1, right? That was from a Football Insights Twitter account. I saw some of their work this year. I wasn't super thrilled with how they called each of the coverages, so I'm not sure 100% how accurate that is, but I don't have charting data from last year. I did decide to chart this year myself, though, right? And I mentioned they have 268 coverage snaps that they've faced as a defense this year. They've been able to run cover 2, which is Tampa 2, and regular cover 2 as zone 26% of the time. Cover 3, 20.6% of the time. Cover 4, they've run 20% of the time. And then man coverage, and that's either cover 1 man or 2 man, they've run 17% of the time. I have 8% cover 0 and 6% cover 6, quarter, half, right? So if you look at those numbers, there's a huge difference between running a bunch of cover 2 and cover 3, and that's your primary coverage, to now running something like 12% or 9% more quarters and 10% more man. And you're running, if you look at it, 17, 26, 20, 20 in terms of the percentages from man coverage, cover 2, cover 3, cover 4. So when they're dropping back into coverage, you've got about 25, if you're trying to guess, you've got one of 4 primary coverages that you have to guess, right? You're going to see the cover 0 looks, and they'll drop out of that stuff too. But like cover 0, you can probably guess is going to happen. The thing with cover 0 is if you're showing your hand as the defense, it's probably third and long where you just want to get the ball out quick, right? So that coverage variety, I think, is what has turbocharged the Vikings defense, because if you look at a lot of the successful plays last year from opponents deep down the field, it was against cover 3 or Tampa 2. Opponents knew they could attack the middle of the field, and that's what allowed them to be so successful throwing the ball over the middle of the field at the end of the season. So like the teams knew, okay, the safeties rotate into cover 3. I'm going to be able to hit this route there, or they're going to rotate into cover 2. Like I've got 1 or 2 options to diagnose post snap. Now you have 4 different options to diagnose post snap instead of just 2. So it's a lot harder as an offense and as a quarterback to diagnose that. That creates more hesitance when you're trying to throw the football. It also means that fewer concepts are going to be good. There are concepts that can beat Tampa 2 and cover 3 basically the same way, especially, dagger, those sorts of dig concepts. If you're able to run off the middle of the field safety with the post or seam route, right, then you can hit the dig underneath it, especially off of play action. It's harder to do that against man coverage, right? It's harder to do that against the way the Vikings have begun to play Tampa 2, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But it's harder to do that against cover 4 because now you have 2 safeties who are able to drive on the dig as opposed to just 1 safety. So at the end of the day, like, there's a lot of benefits to the Vikings for adding the variety of coverages. And I think that's been the number one key for why they've improved as a defense over what they got shredded on last year between the Lions and Packers and Bengals game. And the reason to me that they're able to run those coverages is they just have better personnel on the outside in particular, right? Last year, Byron Murphy was out there, but he missed the final 4 games of the season. So we were trying to work with Mekhi Blackman and Caleb Evans. And unfortunately, Blackman got hurt in the preseason, so he's been out for the year. But we also brought in 2 players who completely replaced the Caleb Evans, right? Caleb Evans has seen 3 defensive snaps at the end of the Houston Texans game where we were getting the backups kind of run because we didn't want these starters to get hurt. Instead, it's been Stephon Gilmore and Shaq Griffin the entire season. And they may not be at their peaks as players, right? Obviously, Stephon Gilmore is a former defensive player of the year. I don't know if he's playing quite at that level, but they are playing really, really good football, and they're playing really smart football. And I believe the reason the Vikings are able to run more man and more cover 4 specifically is because they trust their corners a lot more. Man is very strenuous for a corner. Obviously, you have to follow your receiver all the way around the field. Cover 4, to me, is also more strenuous than cover 3 or cover 2. Cover 2 is the easiest coverage for a corner to play because all they have is an underneath zone. Now, the Vikings often run their corners to safety positions the way they play Tampa 2, just with all the inverted coverages and how they run things around. But still, it's a zone coverage. It's not that hard to play. Cover 4 asks your corners to take everything to the outside by offensive players, right? On the defensive side of the ball. So that's harder than cover 3, where you theoretically have underneath help in a flat and you're just trying to get depth and prevent something from hitting over the top of you. So I don't believe the Vikings were very comfortable allowing Evans and Booth last year with their instincts to do that. Now that they have players with much better instincts in Griffin and Gilmore, I think they're willing to run that a lot more. And that's worked out really, really well for the Vikings, obviously, so far this season. I also think that adding to coverage underneath at the linebacker level has really helped. I talked a bunch about Blake Cashman so far this season, and I think he's been an absolute revelation, whether it's underneath coverage in quarters or Tampa 2. Quarters also stresses your linebackers quite a bit because, in a 7-man coverage, quarters has 4 players potentially deep and 3 players underneath. But because the Vikings blitz a lot, their quarters often ends up with only 2 players underneath. That means there's a lot of space that guys have to cover to prevent yardage after the catch. Cashman's instinct led to an interception on quarters against Brock Purdy because he was able to drive on the throw from one hash to the opposite hash, tip the pass up, and Josh Metellus caught it, right, for the interception. There are throws in the flats that the Vikings have been able to get to, or underneath throws that Blake Cashman has been able to get in the windows of and prevent the throws on those quarters plays because he's very instinctive and able to watch the quarterback's eyes. also understands how the route concepts are going to develop and has the speed to get underneath the ball and kind of deter those throws. I think on deeper throws, you had Kamu Grugier-Hill, who I thought has done a pretty good job in coverage as well, had the interception on Tampa 2, where we were able to play the dig route on a dagger concept, which apparently is how Flores teaches it for the Tampa runner to come and play a dig route and allow the vertical route to go to the safeties on top. So great play by Cashman underneath, a couple of those in the Texans game to deter those throws, and then great play by Kamu Grugier-Hill in the Packers game to turn one of those throws into the interception. I think those guys are really helping in those coverages. The one area you're able to attack, I would say I've seen the best, is play action in that zone that the linebackers avoid over the middle of the field against cover 3. The Vikings linebackers do bite a little bit in those scenarios because they're trying to defend the run. But I don't think that's necessarily a consistent way that opponents can attack the Vikings. So I think Cashman has been huge kind of in underneath coverage. And then I think the third and final coverage thing that we've seen that's been different from the Vikings is how they've been able to play cover 0 this year. So the Vikings, Hawk blitz, Bengal is the package. Hawk is the name of the blitz. There are a couple other calls in there that I'm not honestly super familiar with. There's obviously the one that allows them to drop out into like cover 3, Tampa 2. There's all that stuff. I guess BOA, I learned from Jordan Silvera on Twitter, is where they send everybody, right? Which is a kind of a variation. But Hawk in particular, and they were running maybe more BOA last year. I haven't really seen them run a play where they send the entire house on that cover 0 blitz. They've been running pretty much exclusively Hawk to my eyes and dropping players into the underneath zones. So I went through earlier how Andrew Van Ginkel got that interception by dropping underneath the coverage where Rodgers was going to throw the ball. Notably, where Van Ginkel dropped was to the slide. So the center slid to the right towards Van Ginkel. He dropped into that space because he was watching out Rodgers' eyes. Rodgers opened immediately to the right on the play. Van Ginkel drops right underneath that. There's a rep from last year of Pat Jones doing the drop against the Chargers, and honestly, it's a similarly constructed play call. Herbert hits the number 2, but Jones is on the left side of the line of scrimmage from the defensive perspective, I guess the right side from the offensive perspective. And he immediately takes a step to his right, which is opposite the slide, right? So typically the way you'd expect the offense to run it is slide the pass protection one direction to leave one unblocked defender off the edge. And then I would say you would want to read that unblocked defender if you're the quarterback. So theoretically, you're probably opening to the side of the unblocked defender and then throwing the ball to replace that blitz. Well, a nice answer when you know that if you're the defense, to try to intercept the ball or get in front of the ball on a hot route that's replacing the blitzer is to try to get a player underneath that, like on the Van Ginkel pick. So if as a defense you expect the quarterback to open away from the slide, right, and look away from the slide, you might want to drop that angle you dropped that way initially. The problem is on the Jones rep from last year against the Chargers, he angles that way initially, but Herbert is looking the other direction. So really what they've changed is Van Ginkel's watching the quarterback's eyes and dropping to the direction that the quarterback opens with his eyes. That's a better way to get under the ball and disrupt those throws because you know the ball has to come out pretty much immediately. So the quarterback doesn't really have time to go back to the backside and fool you with his eyes, rather than just dropping to where you expect the quarterback to open his eyes to. So I think Van Ginkel helps with that because he's a player who's a lot more experienced in the Flores defense than someone like Pat Jones did at least last year, right? And he's got a lot more comfortable in coverage than any of the edge rushers the Vikings had last year. So I think that's part of the improvement that's helped the overall coverage scheme for the Vikings. I also think the pass rush in general has been a huge difference. Like, this is not shade to Danielle Hunter. I still think Danielle Hunter is a phenomenal player, but I do think Jonathan Grenard is playing at an extremely high level for the Vikings this year and probably comparable to what Hunter was playing at last year. The thing is, everybody else around him is better, right? Van Ginkel functionally has replaced DJ Wanham, is outplaying what DJ Wanham did last year. Pat Jones has functionally replaced himself and is outplaying his level of play last year, right? That's, a little bit of a joke there, but like Pat Jones has certainly improved as a player and is the third rusher. You have Dallas Turner as a fourth rusher. He's not getting a ton of run. Obviously, he dealt with the injury, but I think it's mostly because everybody else has been so successful, and he's had a couple nice reps, right? Like, it hasn't been everything. But then I also think the addition of Jihad Ward has been a huge boom to the Vikings defense when it comes to pure passing situations. So I noticed this week one, and they've continued out throughout the entire season, when opponents get in pure passing situations, the Vikings aren't having any interior defensive linemen on the field. Harrison Phillips is off the field. Jonathan Bullard's off the field. Taki Taimani, when he gets reps, is off the field. And Jerry Tillery is off the field, right? They only have 4 edge rushers, and typically it's Van Ginkel, Grenard, Ward, and Pat Jones. And Ward has been an interior rusher for the Vikings, and he is wrecking shop on the inside. He crushed the Giants interior in week 1. He's had great reps on pretty much every game. He had a huge batted pass that Rodgers could have caught himself, I guess, in this last game, but, ended up being an incompletion. Just playing really well from what you'd expect as an interior rusher, right? So you get smaller bodies, and Ward's listed at 285 or something like that. So he's obviously not small, but I think it's been notable how much better the Vikings pass rush has been in those situations, because last year it was pretty much Danielle Hunter wins or nobody else does. So I really like what they've been able to do with the offseason additions to that group, right? If you flip it over to the run defense side of the ball, I think it's a similar quality to last year. The numbers, they're performing a lot better. So the Vikings allowed 3.8 yards per attempt last year, but if you look at run DVOA and success, I think success rate, they were pretty okay, but EPA per play, they had a very bad. And I don't really think the film agrees with that. They certainly had the Eagles game where they philosophically were not really trying to defend the run all that hard, but I thought they did a pretty good job in general against the run last year. This year, they're second in EPA per play, really high in DVOA against the run as well, and second in yards per carry against with 3.6, right? So we went from 3.8 last year, which to me is a really good number, to 3.6 this year so far, even better. I think Harrison Phillips is playing up to a really high level. Obviously, he got extended. Jonathan Bullard, I think, is playing great as a run defender. Jerry Tillery, also as a rotational piece, is playing really well as a run defender, and I wasn't expecting that at all. I shouted out Ivan Pace for his ability coming forward. I think Blake Cashman is fine as a run defender. Obviously, if he gets blocked, it's a little bit of a negative, but that's fine. And Josh Metellus kind of makes the whole thing work too, because he can play as in the box as functionally a linebacker. The edges are doing a great job on run defense. I kind of talked about how they beat up on the Jets tight ends earlier, including Dallas Turner. But I think the edges do a great job, especially when they're blocked by tight ends. They really don't let any space be created by that tight end block, which is critical for minimizing gains. So just across the board, really a high level run defense, I think, for the entire team. And if you take it all together, even the role players, I think, on this football team are playing really well, right? You've got Jerry Tillery, Kamu Grugier-Hill. Guys, I was not really interested at all prior to the season stepping up and playing good football. They're not world beaters out there, but they really are positive contributors to the team, right? And you can name every single player on the Vikings defense, and they're playing well right now. So I just really love the overall defensive performance, right? And it's come against some pretty difficult circumstances, right? So obviously passing is more efficient than running. And they faced so many run plays on the season, or so many passing plays on the season. The Vikings faced a ton of plays in general because their offense can't stay on the field, right? They've scored fast in other opportunities, and in the last couple games, they've really struggled to stay on the field and convert third downs. So the Vikings have faced 343 plays. That is the most in the NFL. That's the second most in the NFL behind the Indianapolis Colts, who have bad defenses. The other defenses in the top 5 are all in the bottom 20 of EPA per play against. That's the Bucks, the Falcons, the Jags, and the Bengals, all 3 of whom are tied at 327, right? So the Vikings are first in defensive EPA per play when everybody near them in plays against is at the bottom. The reason they've allowed so many plays is not because they're, secretly a bad defense or have a bad success rate or something like that. It's because they face the most drives in the NFL. So teams have run 60 drives against the Minnesota Vikings, and only one of those is a drive where it ended the half or ended the game. Right, so the Vikings have kneeled down like at the end of every single game to end the game, and they've ended the half with the ball a number of times. If you look at other teams, there are a couple teams that have faced more official drives, but there have been ones that have been eliminated. So the next most is 57, I believe. So they faced 59 true drives, and they don't allow a lot of yards on those drives. They have allowed only the ninth most yards per drive on a per drive basis in the NFL at 26.3. And a lot of that's due to the very skewed run pass ratio that teams have against them, right? They're passing a lot more. They've also only allowed 5.8 yards per play on drives. That's 14th in the NFL. So it's a little bit more near the middle of the pack. But if you look at what the Vikings defense is trying to do, it's especially, but they've been in a lot of, I should say, they've been in a lot of garbage time situations, right? Where you're not necessarily trying to force 3 and outs all the time, although that's really nice. And the Vikings force a ton of 3 and outs, but what you're really trying to do is prevent the offense from scoring quickly. So the clock runs out on them before they can catch up, right? So, teams have put together a couple of very long drives. The one against the Jets where, we had the special teams blunder, which I didn't even get into the special teams blunder. The special teams was an absolute disaster on punt coverage. I don't even really know what you do different. Obviously, Will Reichard was awesome in the game, but like, I don't know if it's necessarily on the coach. Like, it's just the players weren't executing what they were trying to do. Sorry, I'll get back to the defense. That 17 play drive from the Jets, there were a couple long drives from the Packers. There was the long Davis Mills drive that complete garbage time by the Texans, right? So a lot of I think that average is being boosted up by drives that don't really matter at all, even. So it's like the Vikings, I think, have been an absolutely phenomenal defense despite the number of plays they're allowing. So they allow, I believe, 4.8 yards per attempt in the passing game, right? And I've already talked about that, how they're best in EPA and that sort of thing. But like that's an incredibly low number of net yards per attempt, right? And that includes sacks. They've got a bunch of sacks. They've got a bunch of turnovers as well. And I think one of the things you can look at is, are the turnovers going to be sustainable, right? Because they have 13 turnovers. That's tied for most in the league. It's actually tied with the Packers. The thing is, they only have 2 fumble recoveries. And opponents have fumbled 5 times against them, right? So that's kind of bad fumble luck for you. And that's really interesting, right? So you've forced 13 turnovers, most in the league, and you've had bad fumble luck, right? You're not really recovering fumbles at the rate that you would expect. They do have 11 interceptions in that time frame. Interceptions aren't necessarily sticky. But I think what's interesting about the interceptions is, yeah, you can say there are tip drills and that sort of thing. And there certainly have been tip drill interceptions. The Vikings have 41 passes defensed. The Bucs have 13 fewer at 28, and they're second in the NFL. Obviously, we talked about many more passing attempts against the Vikings than other teams. Not 13, not like they have almost 1.5 times as many pass deflections as the second place team in the NFL, more pass attempts against the Vikings. The Vikings are playing really sticky coverage. They're confusing offenses, and that's regularly leading to balls that are tipped, knocked up into the air, and interceptable. I don't think the Vikings have caught nearly as many interceptions as they may have been able to off of the tips. So I honestly think they've kind of had neutral luck on those tipped interceptions and kind of on the interceptable passes that have been thrown to them, right? If you look at PFF, they've assigned quarterbacks 1 more interceptable pass than have actually been thrown against the Vikings. So they have 12 turnover-worthy plays from opposing quarterbacks. There have been a couple weird luck things on punts and that sort of thing with fumbles where opponents are fumbling out of bounds. And, so there's been a bunch of different things where I don't really think the Vikings are forcing more turnovers than or the Vikings are getting lucky kind of in the number of turnovers that they forced. Now, it's going to be really hard to maintain the highest rate of turnovers in the NFL, but I do think that there's some sustainability for what the Vikings are doing on defense across the board, which is what's really impressive to me. Obviously, we'll see how that bears out. The Lions are going to be another really good test for the Vikings after the bye week, but we'll get into a preview of the Lions game this week. But at the end of the day, I'm really impressed with what the defense is doing. And I really think it's a sustainable part of how they're playing football, which is crazy to me. I don't think I would have expected before the season. even with the talent that the Vikings brought in, because, you had a lot of older players, a lot of players where it was questionable, how good they were in terms of like Tillery or that sort of thing. I think we kind of knew what we were getting in Grenard and Van Ginkel, but we were also losing Danielle Hunter, so we didn't know how that would affect us. But really, overall, absolutely thrilled with the defense. Brian Flores has done a phenomenal job. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah deserves a ton of credit for bringing in the guys that we got in. And, can't say much more than that. So, with all that, this has been Kindred Skulls. I'm Matt Freese. You can find me at Fries Football. Nick Olson, my co-host, obviously not able to make it this week. We'll see when we can get him back. Hopefully he'll be back once or twice at least more this season. He is at Nick Olson NFL. We are at Kindred Skulls on Twitter. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, also on YouTube. And with that, Skull Vikings.